The year is 1997. I'm about 5 years old. My mom takes me to a movie theater. I had no idea what we were seeing. I just liked going to the theater. I remember there were more people in the theater than I had ever seen up to that point, and everyone seemed so excited. And when the 20th Century Fox logo came up, the auditorium went silent, just to be broken by the audience cheering when Star Wars came on the screen. I was in for a treat. I loved every minute of the movie. The characters.
I want to learn the ways of the Force and become a Jedi like my father.
The jokes.
Will somebody get this big walking carpet out of my way?
The emotional moments.
No!
I was quite taken up by the whole experience. As a kid, I was quite the Trekkie, and to this day my allegiance leans more towards the Star Trek franchise. That was the best time for me to see Star Wars because although I love Star Trek, it dealt with concepts that were too big for me to comprehend at the time. And Star Wars was a lot easier to understand. Empire equals bad, Rebel Alliance equals good, Darth Vader bad, Luke Skywalker good. It was simplistic without being stupid. And intergalactic space politics belong in Deep Space Nine, not Star Wars.
Must I remind the Senator from Malistère that negotiations are continuing with the Separatists.
Oh.
After seeing Star Wars in the theater, I had to own them on home video. That's when I picked these up. But something became very clear to me. These were not the movies I saw in the theater. These were different. Where was the Jabba the Hutt scene? And why were some of the scenes so much shorter? I didn't realize this at the time, but these were the unaltered versions of the original trilogy. And it wasn't until years later that my family picked up the 1997 special editions on VHS that I realized they actually preferred the original theatrical cuts. Star Wars came out in the summer of 1977 and was the highest grossing movie up to that point. It was a major landmark in George Lucas's career as a filmmaker, making only 2 films previously, but would never direct another movie till 1999, with the start of the prequel trilogy. Being born in the 90s, it's difficult for me to imagine a world without Star Wars, because of the huge influence it's had on our culture. Ultimately, anything I say in this video has already been said 1,000 times before by individuals more qualified to talk on the subject than I. But since this is my channel, I figure I can do whatever the heck I want. Star Wars was a passion project for the then rogue filmmaker and the today businessman George Lucas, who was inspired by the sci-fi adventure serials like Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon. Lucas spent a year writing the script for Star Wars, and depending on what interview you watch, the script was either 200 to 400 pages and included the events of both the original and prequel trilogies. However, it's reasonable to assume that the script was just a bloated version of the '77 film. Originally, the main character was Luke Starkiller, a 60-year-old war general, and Han Solo was a green reptilian man. At one point, Kurt Russell and William Catt were considered for the roles of Han Solo and Luke Skywalker. And as much as I like Mark Hamill and Harrison Ford, I can't help but want to see the alternate universe where Jack Burton and the Greatest American Hero were the heroes of the Star Wars movies. The script underwent many changes, some while making the movie. Shooting began in South Africa. It was extremely stressful for everyone involved. And even after shooting moved to the sound stages of London, the shoot was still very stressful. Lucas wasn't what you would call an actor's director. The cast grew frustrated with Lucas's lack of input on their performances. And Lucas felt frustrated that they didn't automatically know what he wanted. This actually got so bad that Lucas lost his voice, and the cast didn't even know till 2 weeks later. After the initial shoot, the stress continued as the studio grew tired of this over-budget, over-scheduled mess of a movie, and pushed for the special effects to be completed sooner rather than later. Despite the time restraints, the special effects came out better than expected by most. Editing proved to be a challenge due to the lack of coverage. That could be attributed to the rush shoot or Lucas's ability to direct. But with similar issues with the prequels, I'd say it's a combination of the two. After many trials and tribulations, Star Wars premiered and became the highest grossing movie of the time, to the surprise of the studio and Lucas himself. Lucas, who at the beginning asked for merchandising rights as a way to sell posters and such to promote the film, had found himself in a lot of money. And this was the building blocks to the successful businessman he is today. Star Wars opens without the traditional opening credits, but instead opens with the signature crawl in the tradition of classic Flash Gordon serials. as which it was based on.
Are you guys still sure that Lucas was the first one to do this?
The crawl informs the audience of the political situation and the major players in the film. We go from that to our first space battle, wasting no time, and it visually establishes everything we read in the crawl. The rebel leader, Princess Leia, or as her father calls her, Princess Leia,
an analysis of the plans provided by Princess Leia,
played by Carrie Fisher, hides the plans of the Empire's weapon of mass destruction in an R2 unit, just before she is captured by Darth Vader's stormtroopers. The droids flee to the surface of the desert planet Tatooine, just to be captured by Jawas, who sell them to moisture farmers. It's here at nearly 20 minutes into the film that we are introduced to our main character, Luke Skywalker, played by Mark Hamill. While cleaning R2, Luke accidentally triggers Leia's message, where she repeats the famous line,
Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope.
The next morning, Luke finds R2-D2 searching for Obi-Wan Kenobi, and that's when he runs into Ben Kenobi, who saves Luke from the Sand People. Obi-Wan gives Luke his father's lightsaber. And after Obi-Wan hears Princess Leia's pleas for help, and after Luke's family connections are conveniently killed off, Luke agrees to help Obi-Wan and learn the ways of the Force like his father before him. Obi-Wan and Luke hire a smuggler named Han Solo, played by Harrison Ford, and his Wookiee first mate, to transport them aboard the Millennium Falcon to Alderaan to deliver the plans to the rebellion. But upon the Falcon's arrival to the location, the group discovers that Alderaan has been completely destroyed by the Empire's weapon of mass destruction.
Weapons of mass destruction.
The Falcon is captured by a tractor beam and brought into the hangar bay of the weapon of mass destruction. Okay, that joke's getting a little old. I'm just gonna call it the Death Star. While Obi-Wan goes to disable the tractor beam, Luke discovers that Leia's imprisoned aboard, and with the reluctant help of Han and Chewbacca, they try to rescue her. After Obi-Wan disables the tractor beam, he engages in a lightsaber duel with Darth Vader. Once he's sure that the others can escape, he allows himself to be killed, or becomes one with the Force or something. The Falcon escapes the Death Star and then goes to the Rebels' hidden base where they analyze the Death Star plans and identify a flaw in the design that they can utilize to destroy the base. Luke joins the Rebel attack on the Death Star, and with the last-minute help of Han Solo, Luke uses the Force to successfully shoot his target and destroys the Death Star seconds before it can destroy the Rebel base. The film ends with our heroes getting awards for their actions, except for Chewbacca, because screw him! Despite all the problems Star Wars had getting made, it's a really good movie. It has great pacing, decent performances, and a lore that pulls you in. One thing I've always noticed about Star Wars is it really holds up visually. Now there are some dated things in the film, but for the most part the movie doesn't scream, "I was made in the 70s." Compare the robots in this to the robots in The Black Hole or Silent Running. Personally, holding up has never really been a make or break thing with me. Heck, I watch silent films. But the fact of the matter is, it does make it easier for it to transcend generations. And I think this speaks to the longevity of the Star Wars franchise. One criticism I tend to hear about this movie is that the solution to blowing up the Death Star was overly simple and obvious. And I don't overall think this is a criticism of the movie itself, but people taking parody so seriously that they believe it's a flaw with the movie itself.
The Thumb Star is the greatest weapon of mass destruction the universe has ever seen. Luckily, they included a button right here that'll blow the entire thing up.
That's odd. Why would they include a button that could destroy their entire station?
You got me. If I was designing it, I would have left that out.
The fact of the matter is, in the story, the Death Star's flaw is not obvious. That's why getting the plans to the Rebels was so important. The Rebels had to scrutinize these plans for a weakness, and it suggested in one scene that it might not even work. John Williams' score is, in my opinion, the secret ingredient to making this film work. Without it, I don't think the movie would have had the impact it did. Even with the worst Star Wars has to offer, I feel that no one could argue that John Williams' score was anything but great. Star Wars may not have some deep, profound message or some social commentary that propels it into being an important film. It's just a really good movie that captured the imaginations of generations. Some people even point to Star Wars as the film that inspired them to get into the careers they chose. The movie is a love letter to the sci-fi serials it was spawned from, without succumbing to their faults. This movie stands out for so many reasons. It holds an important place in history and the hearts of the people who appreciate it. Luke Skywalker is basically our main character, despite not being introduced into the film until 20 minutes in. He's cocky and rushes into things without thinking, but he comes across as 100% good. And despite being a little whiny,
But I was going into Toshi Station to pick up some power converters.
he's actually very likable. And with scenes like the one where he looks into the sunset, it's easy to sympathize with his desire for more. Luke is a good protagonist because he's seen many of these strange things for the first time along with the audience. I always thought of Obi-Wan Kenobi as the Merlin of the Star Wars trilogy. He's the wise old sage that points our hero in the right direction. I remember as a kid he was my second favorite character, while Han Solo was and still is my favorite character of all of Star Wars. To this day I don't know if he's called Han or Han because they go back and forth throughout all three movies. He and his first mate Chewbacca are a pair of smugglers who reluctantly help our heroes. Han Solo is selfish but deep down a good person, as illustrated by saving Luke at the end of the film. But there's a dark streak in him that can be seen when he shoots Guido in the bar. I don't think Princess Leia gets enough credit in these movies. Yes, she's basically a damsel in distress, but she defies all characteristics associated with that kind of role. She's sort of the unsung hero of this movie, risking her life for the rebellion, sacrificing her home planet, and the moment she's rescued, she sort of takes charge.
Into the garbage chute, flyboy!
My only real gripe with her is she can't keep her English accent to save her life. R2-D2 and C-3PO are often considered the eyes of the audience, because we spend so much time with them at the beginning. But I'd argue that's Luke's role. R2-D2 and C-3PO are just comic relief in my opinion, and I think they serve that role well. I personally love R2's look, one of my favorite robot designs in all of science fiction. And the look of C-3PO is based off the Machine Man, from one of my favorite films, Metropolis. It's impossible to talk about Star Wars without bringing up the re-edits. In 1997, George Lucas reissued the movies with color correction and added special effects. Some would say these changes were a detriment to the integrity of the original films. Now, some of these changes I really don't mind, like fixing continuity errors, updating special effects that didn't really work the first time around. But when it comes to stuff like the Jabba the Hutt scene, it really bothers me. Because on a narrative level, there's no reason for the scene at all. All the dialogue in this scene is the same dialogue from the Guido scene before it. It serves no purpose. Also, the special effects in the scene are terrible, no matter what version, and date the film more than any 70s moment in the entire movie. Some of the color correction stuff doesn't really bother me, but for the most part I feel like it makes the movie look really washed out. And there are some moments that are just flat out obnoxious. Why the hell is this thing moving in front of the camera? It's obstructing the view. There's no purpose for it other than to inflate Lucas's ego. There's also the infamous Guido and Han edit that spawned the popular phrase, "hand shot first." Now personally, I understand the frustration with this scene. It kinda shows that Lucas doesn't understand his own characters. In the documentary The People vs. George Lucas, they make a great argument as to why it was wrong to alter this scene. In my opinion, the alteration ruins the homage, and the most disgusting thing about it, it's done so poorly. In the 1997 version, it's just a bad edit. In the DVD release version, they look like paper dolls being manipulated. And the Blu-ray version just looks plain dumb. It doesn't quite bother me as much as some people, but I do recognize it's not good. Some changes I understand, but the execution of them looks so bad they stick out like a sore thumb. The screen might as well turn a bright red every time an alteration is added. It's that distracting to me. A group of fans went through and completely re-edited and remastered the original films to make them look as though they were unaltered. It took years of dedication, and in my opinion, they've never looked better. I would recommend watching these over the special editions any day of the week. The guy who headed the project said that Lucas not allowing the fans access to theatrical cuts was a form of cultural graffiti, and I'm inclined to agree with him. I mean, look at this. Ridley Scott has almost every version of Blade Runner available on one Blu-ray set. Why can't that be done with Star Wars? And don't give me that, oh, the theatrical versions don't exist anymore, because that is simply not true. Even though these remasters are only in 720p, they visually dwarf the 1080p Blu-ray in picture quality. It's recommended by the people who made the remasters to buy the Blu-rays before downloading them. So I reluctantly did. I opted out of getting the big special edition pack that came with all 6 movies for the steelbooks. I really love the way this steelbook looks, because it matched my VHS copy that I had when I was a kid, with Darth Vader's face being the main thing you see. I also love that on the back it comes with the original poster art. And to my knowledge, I haven't seen any other release of this film with this art on it, other than the VHS. And I think that's a shame because it's beautiful and it's far better than the 97 reissued posters. Now there is the reissued DVD that's meant to look like the poster, but I always thought it looked ugly. Though I have to admit it's better than the DVD release before it. In conclusion, I love Star Wars. It's a really fun movie, and whether you're young or old, you can connect to it in some way. Everyone has their own first time watching Star Wars story, and when I watch Star Wars, I can't help but think of my own, and being taken back to my childhood by being caught up in a fun sci-fi adventure with strange and interesting characters. I don't watch Star Wars much as an adult, but when I do, it's for that feeling of nostalgia. I'm Joey Hollywood, and that was my review of Star Wars from 1977. Thank you for watching.
But I was going into Toshi Station to pick up some power converters.